In Johannesburg, South Africa, the stakes have never been higher. Behind the polished smiles and carefully choreographed photo sessions of the G20 Finance Summit lies a storm of economic tension, competing national interests, and the desperate hope of billions. For most people, this summit is just another meeting, but for those who understand its gravity, it represents a crossroads for the entire global economy. This isn't just another gathering. The G20 Finance Summit of 2025 is taking place at a moment when the world economy is reeling from crisis after crisis, rising inflation, trade wars, energy shortages, and a growing debt disaster in developing countries. This is where the 20 most powerful economies, representing 85% of global GDP, come together to make decisions that will ripple through every corner of the globe. But why does this year feel different? For starters, the location matters. South Africa isn't just a host, it's a symbol of the global South's growing influence. Hosting this summit on African soil is a statement. The world's fastest growing economies are demanding more than aid. They're demanding a seat at the decision-making table. Inside the sleek conference rooms, delegates from the United States, China, India, Europe, and the African Union aren't just debating policy. They're negotiating survival strategies. For Africa, it's about breaking free from crippling debt. For the West, it's about countering China's rising influence. For China and India, it's about redefining the global order in their favor. What's on the agenda? Debt relief, climate, financing, trade stability, and energy transition. But under the surface, these aren't just technical issues. They're battlegrounds for power. Will the US hold its dominance? Will China cement its grip on the global South? And can developing countries finally get the justice they've been demanding for decades? This summit could reshape how the world trades, how it finances development, and even how power itself is distributed. But if it fails, expect defaults, political instability, and a deepening economic divide between the rich and poor. The cameras may capture the handshakes, but the real story is being written in whispered conversations behind closed doors, and what's decided here could change the future of your paycheck, your bills, and the stability of your nation. Imagine this: a nation spends more on paying interest to foreign creditors than on schools or hospitals. This isn't fiction, it's the reality for 24 African countries on the verge of economic collapse. And now, at the G20 Summit, these nations are pleading not for aid, but for justice. Africa's debt crisis isn't new, but it has reached a boiling point. Decades of borrowing from Western lenders and China have created a vicious cycle. Loans lead to more loans, with interest rates climbing and repayment windows shrinking. Many African nations now spend 40% or more of their national budgets just servicing debt. This isn't just economics, it's survival. Without relief, governments can't fund public health programs, infrastructure projects, or even basic services. It's no surprise that protests are erupting across the continent, with citizens demanding that their leaders break free from the chains of debt. At the G20, the African Union has arrived with a clear message. We don't want handouts. We want restructuring. They're calling for long-term solutions, including fairer lending terms, reduced interest rates, and, in some cases, outright debt forgiveness. But will they get it? That depends on the politics behind the numbers. Western countries want to maintain their financial leverage. China, which holds a significant share of African debt, is reluctant to offer deep relief without getting concessions in return, and international institutions like the IMF and World Bank are caught between trying to help and protecting their own balance sheets. This summit could be a turning point, or just another missed opportunity. If meaningful agreements are reached, Africa could finally redirect billions toward development. But if negotiations fail, we could witness a wave of defaults, political unrest, and a humanitarian disaster on an unprecedented scale. For millions of Africans, the question isn't abstract. Will the G20 finally listen? Or will their future be sold to the highest bidder, yet again? Behind every polite handshake at the G20, there's an invisible battlefield. It's not fought with weapons, but with tariffs, trade routes, and currency swaps. Welcome to the new great game, where the United States, China, and India are competing, not just for influence, but for the very rules that govern the global economy. The G20 floor may look cooperative, but beneath the surface, Washington and Beijing are locked in an economic duel. The United States has doubled down on its tariff policies, claiming it's about protecting American workers. But for China, it's a declaration of economic war. In response, Beijing has deepened its investments in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, offering loans, infrastructure projects, and trade deals, all designed to expand its sphere of influence. And then there's India. Once a passive observer in global forums, India is now positioning itself as a decisive middle power. With its growing economy and strategic location, New Delhi has become the balancing force, keeping close ties with the US while benefiting from its trade relationship with China. This friend-to-all strategy gives India an upper hand at the negotiating table. But this clash isn't only about money. It's about who writes the next chapter of globalization. The US wants to preserve the dollar's dominance. China wants to replace Western-led financial institutions with BRICS-led alternatives. India wants to leverage its rising status to shape a new multipolar world order. For developing countries, this clash presents both opportunities and dangers. They can benefit from competing offers, but they can also get caught in the crossfire. As the storm brews between these superpowers, one thing is clear: this summit isn't just about economics. It's about who will lead the 21st century. Every year, the world meets to talk about climate change. Promises are made, headlines are written. But for many nations, the question isn't whether we fight climate change, it's who pays for it. And at the G20, that question has never been more urgent. The climate financing deadlock is one of the summit's thorniest issues. Developed countries promised $100 billion a year to help poorer nations transition to green energy. But the reality, less than half of that funding has materialized, and much of it came as loans, not grants, pushing countries deeper into debt. Meanwhile, developing nations argue, you polluted the planet for centuries. Now you want us to pay for cleaning it up? They need billions to build solar farms, wind turbines, and resilient infrastructure. But they can't afford to take on more debt. Adding to the tension, the US recently pulled out of a major energy transition deal, citing domestic political concerns. This has left European nations scrambling to pick up the slack, but they too are struggling with their own economic woes. For oil-dependent economies, the stakes are existential. Pushing too fast toward decarbonization could devastate their revenues, but delaying action on climate could destroy their futures. This isn't just a financial debate, it's a moral reckoning. Will wealthy nations finally pay their share, or will the cost of climate change continue to fall hardest on those least responsible for it? In the quiet negotiations on climate, the world's future is being priced like a commodity, and the longer the talks drag on, the higher that price becomes. When cameras are off and journalists are gone, the real G20 begins. Behind the polished statements and scripted press conferences lies the world's most exclusive marketplace, where policies are bought, sold, and negotiated in whispers. In these off-camera meetings, lobbyists representing banks, energy companies, and tech giants push their agendas. Corporations that fund political campaigns back home often wield more influence here than smaller nations at the table. It's also where secret side deals are struck. Want debt relief? Agree to open your markets. Need a trade concession? Pledge support for a foreign policy agenda. This is how diplomacy at the G20 often works, through backroom bargains that rarely make the headlines. Critics call it global governance without accountability. Supporters call it pragmatic deal-making. But whichever label you use, one thing is clear. What happens behind those closed doors can alter the fate of entire economies. And it's not just nations doing the bargaining. Global corporations, from big tech to fossil fuel giants, are here. 2. Shaping agreements that affect everything from data privacy laws to energy policies. While the public sees unity, behind those heavy doors, the real negotiations are a mix of compromise, coercion, and cold calculations, the kind of deals that never make it to the evening news. What does a summit in Johannesburg mean for someone sitting at a cafe in New York, or a farmer in Kenya, or a small business owner in Delhi? More than you think. The G20's decisions trickle down to everyday life in ways most people never see. Debt relief can determine whether a child in Africa goes to school. Trade agreements can influence the price you pay for groceries or fuel. Climate funding decisions can decide whether your city floods in the next storm or stays safe. But here's the bigger picture. We're entering a new era of global economics. The age of one or two superpowers dominating the world is ending. A multipolar world, one where the US, China, India, and other emerging powers share influence, is emerging. For some, that means opportunity. For others, it means uncertainty. But one thing is undeniable. The rules of the game are changing, and those who fail to adapt, whether countries, corporations, or individuals, risk being left behind. As the summit ends and leaders board their private jets, the world won't change overnight. But in the quiet months ahead, the decisions made here will ripple across continents, shaping policies, economies, and futures. And the question remains, who will truly benefit from the new global order?